The paper tore in Eleanor Whitmore's fist with a small, dry sound. She had carried Gerald Hatch's letter 840 miles from St. Louis, believing every mile brought her closer to a place where usefulness might finally count for more than appearance. He had written that he owned a farm outside Harlan Creek, Montana, and wanted a capable wife who could work beside him. Capable. Eleanor had held on to that word. Now late October wind scraped along the empty platform, and the station clerk, Aldous Finch, stood before her with his spectacles crooked and pity sitting badly on his face. "Gerald Hatch married 3 weeks ago," he said. "Clara Dobbs, Methodist Church." Eleanor looked at the torn letter in her lap. "Did he write to tell me not to come?" Finch hesitated. "No, miss. That was answer enough." The last passengers had gone. The mountains beyond Harlan Creek were turning black. Eleanor had $8.40, 1 suitcase, a Bible, her mother's brooch, a change of clothes, and no room waiting anywhere. Nearly all her savings had gone into Gerald's promise. At 25, Eleanor knew how people saw her. She was a large woman and had spent years recognizing the tiny pause before strangers decided what that meant. She had been denied work, dismissed by men, pitied by women, and had learned to stand straight beneath it. That evening, alone on the platform, standing straight felt useless. "Maybe," she whispered to the cold, "people like me simply aren't meant to be chosen. Don't sit alone tonight, miss." The man's voice came from her left, low enough not to startle. He stood well beyond arm's reach, as if he had chosen the distance carefully. Tall and broad-shouldered, in a battered canvas coat, he had dark hair silvering at the temples and a hat held respectfully in both hands. His weathered face gave little away, but his eyes stayed on Eleanor's face. "My name is Thomas Carter," he said. "I have a ranch 4 miles out. Spare room has a lock. Stove works. Supper's on. You can stay the night if you've nowhere safer." Eleanor studied him. Desperation could make danger look like mercy, and she had not survived 25 years by becoming foolish at the first kind voice. Why? Thomas turned his hat once between his hands. "Because a stranger fed me and put a roof over me once when I was in bad shape. Asked nothing back. I've tried to return the favor when I can. That's all? That's all. I would work." His brows lifted slightly. "I won't take charity," Eleanor said. "If I stay, I cook, clean, keep house, whatever needs doing." "That sounds fair." She gave him her name. He lifted her suitcase as naturally as if carrying weight were simply what his hands did. Before following him, Eleanor looked once at Gerald's torn letter. Then she left it on the bench. Thomas did not ask her to pick it up. The wagon road climbed away from town beneath a hardening sky. Frost had begun silvering the grass in the ditches, and the horse's breath showed white in the dusk. For a mile, neither of them spoke. "You don't owe me an explanation," Thomas finally said. "I came to marry Gerald Hatch." His hands remained steady on the reins. "Small Valley," he said. "I know him. He didn't want me after all." Thomas looked ahead. "I'm sorry. You're the second man to say that tonight. Does it help more the second time?" "No. Didn't think it would." The answer surprised something in her. Not enough for laughter. Enough to make breathing easier. The Carter Ranch emerged from darkness by smell before shape. Hay, horses, damp earth, wood smoke. Then came the barn, corrals, sheds, and a 2-story house larger than Eleanor expected, most of its windows dark. Only the kitchen lamp burned. Inside, beans and salted pork simmered on the stove. The room was clean without being cared for. A cracked lamp chimney smoked faintly. Firewood beside the stove sat too low for the season. A ledger book was wedged behind tins in the pantry. Thomas showed her the spare room. Narrow bed, washstand, a solid iron bolt on the door. He slid it once so she could hear the clunk. "Supper when you're ready." Then he left. Eleanor sat on the bed and stared at that locked door. Warm, safe. Alone when she wished to be. Not wanted, perhaps, but not trapped. That distinction mattered. At supper, she began noticing things because noticing was what her mind did when the rest of her was exhausted. The pantry was disordered. The lamp wick needed trimming. The kitchen cupboard sagged at one hinge. The ledger in the pantry had no business being there. "How many cattle?" she asked. Thomas paused over his beans. "About 400. Horses? Dozen. Hands. Pete year-round. 2 seasonal men. Accounts?" Thomas slowly put down his spoon. Eleanor sighed. "I ask too many questions." "It isn't the number of questions. It's which ones." She pointed with her chin toward the pantry. "There's an account ledger behind your flour tins." Thomas looked. "That," he said, "is mildly concerning. It concerns me too." His mouth almost became a smile. The smile vanished when she asked whether the ranch was making money. "Not well," he said. "How not well?" For the first time, Thomas looked at his own hands instead of at her. "My wife kept the books, Margaret. She died 4 years ago in a winter storm." His voice flattened around the words. "The baby died too. A boy." Eleanor did not rush to fill the silence. "After that," he continued, "I kept the cattle alive because cattle I understand. Everything else piled up. 4 years isn't always a long time." Thomas looked at her then. "No," he said. "It isn't." They washed the supper dishes together. He dried while she washed. When they finished, Thomas trimmed the lamp wick without being reminded. The light steadied. "I'll get the ledger," he said. "Tomorrow." "You plan to be here tomorrow?" "If the offer stands." "It stands. Then tomorrow, we see how bad your accounts actually are." That night, Eleanor lay awake, listening to wind press its cold fingers against the house. She had traveled west, expecting marriage, and found abandonment. Yet in the room beside a kitchen with bad coffee and a misplaced ledger, a different kind of plan had begun forming. Surviving, she decided, was not the end of anything. It was the part you built on. Within a week, Thomas's 4 ledgers were spread across the kitchen table. Within 3, Eleanor had rebuilt 2 years of neglected books, written suppliers and billings, identified a costly feed contract, and shown Thomas that his south pasture was eating money. "You're maintaining too much ground for 60 head, she said, tapping a column with her pencil. "Either graze more cattle there, or spend less keeping it." Thomas bent over the page. "Pete's been saying that for a year. Pete didn't give you the numbers." "No. Now you have them." He glanced at her, close enough that she caught the smell of leather and wood smoke on his coat. Eleanor shifted an inch away on instinct. Thomas noticed. He did not move closer. A moment later he asked, "Why would a woman who can do this answer a marriage letter from Gerald Hatch?" The question did not feel cruel. That made it harder. "Because no one in St. Louis was looking for a woman who could do this," she said. "Not in any way that gave me a future." Gerald used the word capable. I believed he meant it. Thomas's jaw tightened. "He's a fool. He found something he wanted more. He left you on a freezing platform without warning. I can blame him for that." Eleanor looked at him. "Thank you." He nodded toward the ledgers. "Feed suppliers?" It was his way of returning dignity to the room. So they worked. Eleanor reorganized the pantry, repaired the cupboard hinge, sealed the back door draft, moved the ledgers into the study, inventoried the root cellar, and negotiated prices by letter. Pete, Thomas's wiry 50-year-old ranch hand, distrusted her with admirable efficiency. Then one rainy afternoon, Eleanor carried lunch to the barn, and Pete asked her to look at a mare's swollen foreleg. "Minor strain," Eleanor said after examining it. "Rest her. Cold cloths. If the heat spreads, then worry." Pete bit into his sandwich. "That's what I thought. Then why ask me? Costs less to be wrong out loud than wrong alone." Eleanor considered him. "That is sensible." After a while, Pete said, "Thomas is a good man. Had bad years. Let things go. I've noticed. Good seeing them come back. It was the closest thing to welcome he knew how to offer. In town, kindness came more slowly. People noticed that an unmarried woman had arrived to marry Gerald Hatch, and instead, taken up residence beneath the roof of Thomas Carter, a respected widower with land. In Harland Creek, curiosity became gossip quickly. A man outside the hardware store called her Thomas's charity case. Eleanor stopped. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore," she told him. "I manage Mr. Carter's household accounts. In 3 weeks, I have identified enough unnecessary expense to save his ranch a significant sum by year's end. I am not a stray, and I am not charity. What you choose to call me tells me considerably more about you than it does about me." Then she wished him a pleasant afternoon and walked away before he could recover. Her heart hammered all the way to the corner. She never told Thomas. That evening, however, she heard his voice in the hall, speaking to a visitor. "Miss Whitmore is under my roof," he said quietly, "and the next man who has something disrespectful to say about her can say it to me." The front door closed. Thomas entered the kitchen. "Supper's nearly ready," Eleanor said. "Smells good." Neither mentioned what she had heard. But from then on, the house felt fractionally different, as if something invisible had shifted into alignment. A month after Eleanor arrived, a letter came for her on expensive paper. William Hayes offered her $50 to leave Harland Creek. His language was polished. His threat was not. He referred to the embarrassing circumstances of her arrival and suggested that a woman in her particular circumstances should understand when remaining in a place was unwise. Thomas read the letter at the kitchen table and became very still. "You know him," Eleanor said. "Yes." "Then tell me why he wants me gone." Thomas had spent weeks learning that when Eleanor asked directly, delay served no one. 4 years earlier, he told her, Harland Creek's valley had held 11 substantial ranches. 7 were gone. Their owners had been pressed by strange debts, disputed boundaries, altered loan terms, tax trouble, or sudden buyers who appeared when resistance became too expensive. William Hayes stood somewhere behind nearly every loss. Thomas's ranch was one of the last large holdings outside Hayes's control. More important, a reliable creek crossed the north pasture. Whoever owned that water could dictate grazing across much of the valley. "He's offered for this place 3 times, Thomas said. "I refused. And now I'm here." "Yes." Eleanor reread Hayes's letter. "If he can turn me into a scandal, he damages your reputation. If I leave, you're alone with neglected accounts again. If I stay and make this operation harder to squeeze, I become a problem." Thomas watched her. "You work things out quickly." "It's often inconvenient." She asked about Gerald. Thomas admitted there were reasons to suspect a connection. Gerald had recently bought equipment he could not afford, and then married Clara Dobbs, niece of Foster Dobbs, Hayes's closest local associate. Eleanor sat back. The humiliation on the platform changed shape. She had not merely been rejected. Someone had found her loneliness useful. "He moved me across 800 miles like a piece on a board." "Yes." "I'm not leaving." "Eleanor." "He offered $50, as if that were the price of my disappearance." Her voice remained level, which was how Thomas knew she was furious. "I have done nothing wrong. I will not behave as if I have. I want to help you fight him. You know what kind of man he is?" "I know enough." Thomas studied her for a long time. Then he said, "Pete knows things, and there's a retired circuit judge in town named Avery Cross. He's been watching Hayes for years." "Good. Tomorrow we start with every deed, tax receipt, boundary survey, and county letter you own." Thomas's expression softened by a degree. "When I found you," he said, "I thought you were broken, or about to be. And now? Now I think you may be the most dangerous person in this valley." Eleanor smiled. "Go to bed, Mr. Carter. We have work in the morning." Pete's information changed everything. Months earlier, former rancher Daniel Corr had told Pete that someone inside the county records office altered survey lines and deed dates, creating disputes owners could not afford to fight. Corr had once owned 400 acres and 2,000 head. Now he worked as a laborer. Eleanor immediately asked for Thomas's original survey. They found 3 maps dated 1879 in a wooden box beneath old correspondence. They found county letters from later years, whose language suggested the current record differed from the original. Before Margaret's death, Eleanor realized, Hayes's pressure on Thomas had begun while Margaret was still alive. Grief crossed Thomas's face, then changed into something harder. "What do we do?" "We prove the records changed," Eleanor said. "We do not need to begin by proving Hayes ordered it. We prove alteration, then we build outward." Avery Cross listened to her presentation in his front room. He was 65, compact, silver-haired, and far less theatrical than Eleanor expected of a former judge. When she finished, he said, "You have an unusually good mind. I've been told it was wasted by foolish people." Cross confirmed his suspicion that County Records clerk Leonard Pratt might be compromised. Pratt had served 19 years on a modest salary and somehow purchased an expensive house. The problem was proof. Then another problem arrived first. 6 weeks after Eleanor stepped off the train, county officials retroactively reassessed Thomas's property taxes and claimed 2 years of unpaid difference. He had 60 days to pay an amount he could not produce or risk action against the ranch. Thomas had paid every bill on time. Eleanor spread 5 years of receipts and assessments across the kitchen table. The altered numbers revealed themselves to her almost immediately. "Different hand," she said. Thomas frowned at the papers. "I don't see it." "Stop reading the number. Look at the writing." The original clerk crossed his sevens cleanly and pressed lightly. The revised figures were darker and hooked. Someone had gone backward into an old assessment and raised the valuation. Thomas's receipts proved he had paid correctly, but the changed record made him appear delinquent. Pete stared at the pages. "That's clever." "Yes," Eleanor said grimly. "A forged bill looks criminal. A correction looks clerical. The burden falls on Thomas." "One ranch is a dispute," Thomas said slowly. 5 ranches become a pattern." They sent a telegram to Daniel Corr and began locating other displaced ranchers. Then an unsigned note reached Eleanor. "If you want to know what Hayes has on Hatch, ask Hatch's wife." The note came from Avery Cross, as Eleanor learned the next morning. Clara Dobbs Hatch had approached him privately and knew enough to connect the scheme against Eleanor to Hayes's land campaign. Thomas objected to Eleanor approaching Clara alone only once. "She's already afraid," Eleanor said. "She came forward anyway. I can meet her halfway." Thomas wanted to keep her out of danger. Eleanor could see it plainly. But he also understood, increasingly, that respecting her meant allowing her to choose risk with full knowledge. "Go," he said. "Be careful." The tea room was nearly empty on a Wednesday morning. Clara Hatch sat with both hands around a cup she never drank from. She was only about 21, neatly dressed, pretty, frightened, and practiced at hiding the last condition. "My uncle told Hayes about Gerald's marriage letter months ago," she told Eleanor. "Gerald wrote it honestly. He really was searching for a wife." That fact hurt in a quieter way than Eleanor expected. Then what changed? Foster told Hayes. Hayes realized an abandoned woman arriving here could be used against Thomas. If you stayed at his ranch, they could make it a scandal. If you left angry, they hoped you would say enough that people would question Thomas anyway. And Gerald? He learned too late what Hayes intended. He wrote warning you not to come. Eleanor's breath stopped. "I never received it." Hayes's man intercepted it. The platform returned to Eleanor in one cold flash. The ripped paper, empty rails, the certainty that Gerald had judged her unworthy even of notice. It had not happened exactly that way. That did not erase it, but truth mattered even when it came late. What does Hayes hold over Gerald? Clara looked toward the window before answering. A loan. Gerald had borrowed from Hayes when his farm struggled. He signed without understanding clauses that allowed Hayes to seize the property after default. Hayes had delayed foreclosure while Gerald remained useful. "My marriage," Clara said, "was part of the price for keeping the farm." Eleanor's anger sharpened. 2 women, moved across a board by the same hand. "Would you testify?" Clara swallowed. "I'm afraid." I know. My uncle has influence everywhere. I know that too. Eleanor leaned forward. You do not have to decide this minute, but there are people preparing to stand with you when you do. Clara's face changed slightly. Gerald wants to speak. He is ashamed. If I testify, he will too. Eleanor reached across the table and covered Clara's hand once. Then go home and wait. Say nothing yet. When Eleanor rode back to the ranch, Thomas and Pete were waiting in the yard. Hayes had made another offer. Cancel the tax claim if Thomas signed an option, giving Hayes the right to buy the ranch for roughly 40 cents on the dollar. He's impatient, Eleanor said. Or scared, Pete answered. Good. Thomas caught Eleanor's sleeve as she moved toward the house. The touch was gentle and immediately released. Tell me what happened. She told him about Clara, Gerald's intercepted warning, the coerced loan, and their willingness to testify. Thomas's anger settled into thought. Gerald tried to warn you. Yes. That doesn't undo the platform. No. But it changes what kind of man he is. He isn't innocent. He's frightened. There's a difference. You're not as angry with him as I expected. I'm angry. I simply have better places to spend it. Thomas almost smiled. That evening, Cross joined them around the kitchen table. Pete left to locate another former rancher, Sam Ellery, while Cross planned a two-part legal strike, an injunction freezing the tax collection, and a territorial complaint alleging corruption in the county records office. They had days, not weeks. Cross also warned them that Hayes would attack Eleanor's reputation before he surrendered control. A man who had built power through leverage understood that people were easier to dispossess once their neighbors stopped believing them. Eleanor sat beneath the steady lamp and listened. Then we tell the truth first. Cross raised a brow. Hayes has already taught this town to see every victim as the author of his own failure, Eleanor said. The core ranch, Ellery, the others, people assume they made bad choices. If the valley sees the pattern before Hayes gives them a new lie about me, his lie has less room to grow. Thomas looked at her. You want to win the story before he does. I want the truth in place before he replaces it. Later, after Cross left, Thomas remained standing on the far side of the kitchen table. Eleanor. Somewhere in the previous weeks, he had stopped calling her Miss Whitmore. If this becomes worse, he said, if Hayes harms something you cannot recover, I need you to know I will make him answer for it. Eleanor held his gaze. I didn't stay because I needed someone to save me from the consequences of my choices. I know. Then don't stand in front of me. Thomas absorbed that. Stand beside me, she said. His voice softened. Can I do both? Something unfamiliar moved in her chest. Yes, she said. I think you can. 2 mornings later, Hayes struck. Letters went throughout the valley, accusing Eleanor of using false romantic pretenses to attach herself to a wealthy rancher. Hayes also invented unresolved financial disputes in St. Louis and hinted that documents proved it. The accusation was false. That did not prevent it from spreading. Margaret Sully, the dry goods merchant's wife, warned Eleanor that the town had split into 3 camps: those who trusted Thomas, those who had always distrusted Eleanor, and those waiting to see which story survived. Eleanor walked straight to Cross. This is panic, she said after reading his copy. How do you know? Because it sounds specific without being specific. Certain documents, unresolved disputes, no names, dates, debts, creditors. He has nothing, so he needs suspicion to do what evidence cannot. Then what? We move today. Daniel Corr was already on a train with his original papers. Pete had found Sam Ellery, who agreed to provide a sworn statement. The missing piece was Gerald and Clara. Eleanor rode alone to the Hatch farm. Clara met her outside. He's frightened, she whispered. Hayes's letter reached him. Gerald sat at the kitchen table looking smaller than the man Eleanor had imagined during 840 miles of travel. Thin, nervous hands, shame plain on his face. Eleanor sat opposite him. I am not here for an apology. I am here because William Hayes is close to destroying people who have finally begun resisting him. Will you help us? Gerald glanced at Clara. What do you need? The loan agreement. Hayes has the original. A copy. Gerald froze. Clara fetched a tin document box. Gerald searched and pulled out a folded sheet. I copied it the day I signed. Eleanor read the agreement twice. A transfer clause allowed Hayes to assign the debt after default. He could shift the claim into another company, foreclose through that entity, and bury his direct connection. Harland Creek Land Holdings, Eleanor said. That's how he has been doing it. Gerald's face drained. The marriage didn't save the farm, Eleanor said. It only bought your cooperation. He planned to take it eventually. Gerald covered his face, then lowered his hands. Tell me what to do. By evening, Daniel Corr had arrived, carrying the original survey of the land stolen from him. Cross spread Thomas's records, Corr's papers, Ellery's statement, Gerald's loan copy, and Eleanor's comparisons across his desk. We file tomorrow, he said. The injunction would freeze Thomas's tax collection. The territorial complaint would allege systematic alteration of public records and coercive seizure of ranches. Corr sat silently until the legal details were finished. Will I get my land back? Cross answered him with respect instead of comfort. I cannot promise that, but if fraud caused the transfer, every transaction that followed can be challenged. Corr nodded. More than I had yesterday. The next morning, Cross and Thomas filed both actions at the county courthouse. Eleanor stayed at the ranch with Pete and Corr, organizing a timeline of all 7 ranch losses, because she needed useful work beneath her hands. When Thomas returned at noon, she read success in his face. Filed? Both. Then we eat. Pete stared at her. That's your response? In an hour, Hayes will know. We may as well face him fed. They had just finished when a rider came hard up the road. Someone had broken into Cross's study while his wife was distracted at the door. Copies of county correspondence had been stolen. Thomas rode for town with Cross and Eleanor. At the judge's house, Eleanor stood beside the open study window, thinking faster than fear. The filed originals? Already in the territorial submission, Cross said. So Hayes took copies he cannot use to stop anything. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He was late. He wanted us frightened. Are you? Eleanor looked at the empty place where the file had been. Yes. Thomas waited. She added, and pleased. Pleased? We are frightening him too. The next morning, Gerald arrived at the Carter Ranch on a lathered horse. Hayes himself had come to the Hatch farm after dark. He had calmly told Gerald that if he gave a sworn statement, the loan would be called immediately through Harland Creek Land Holdings. By the time lawyers could respond, Hayes claimed, the farm would be gone. What do I do? Gerald asked. Eleanor looked at the man who had once been the center of her imagined future and saw clearly that he was no longer that man in her life. He was only himself, flawed, frightened, not beyond repair. Bring Clara here! Bring every paper you have! Gerald hesitated. Hayes will call the loan whether you testify or not, Eleanor said. The moment you gave me that copy, you became dangerous to him. Silence has never protected anyone from a man like Hayes. You're not afraid of him? I am afraid. I am also furious. The fury is proving more useful. After Gerald rode away, Thomas came to stand beside her. We're going to be all right, Eleanor said. It sounded less like certainty than a decision. Thomas's shoulder nearly touched hers. I know. His eyes stayed on her longer than usual. Eleanor. Not yet, she said softly. He understood. Finish this first. Gerald returned with Clara. Cross arrived. Gerald repeated Hayes's threat word for word. Cross set down his pen. He threatened a witness in an active territorial matter. We are past civil intimidation now. A wire went to Helena before noon. The answer came that evening. An independent territorial investigator would arrive in 4 days. His name was Robert Crane. He came off the Thursday train in a worn gray suit with a leather notebook and the unhurried manner of a man who had spent years watching liars discover that volume did not improve truth. Cross brought him to the Carter Ranch that afternoon. Crane sat at the kitchen table. Eleanor put coffee before him. He did not touch it. "From the beginning," he said. "Not what you think I want. Everything." Eleanor spoke for 40 minutes. She gave dates, documents, witnesses, and separated proof from inference. She traced Gerald's letter, Hayes's bribe, the tax alterations, Core and Ellery's records, Clara and Gerald's evidence, the stolen file, and Hayes's direct threat. Crane wrote without interruption, except for precise questions. When she finished, he asked about Hayes's accusation of financial wrongdoing in St. Louis. "There was none. I have references from both positions I held there. I already wired St. Louis," Crane said. "I found nothing supporting Hayes's claim." Eleanor stared at him. He was counting on no one checking. Yes. The cold anger she had carried for weeks became strangely quiet. Crane closed his notebook. "The injunction gives you at least 60 days. The ranch cannot be taken through this tax claim while I investigate." At the door he paused. "What will you do afterward, Miss Whitmore? Whatever happens." It was the first question for which Eleanor had prepared no answer. "I'm staying." Crane nodded and left. Thomas remained in the kitchen. "You're staying in Harland Creek," he said. "Yes." "Here?" Eleanor's pulse changed. "In the valley," she said carefully. "I have work here now, something I helped build. I don't leave things I've built." Thomas turned toward the counter and stood with both palms resting on it. She had learned not to hurry him when language mattered. "I'm poor at this," he said at last. "At what?" "At saying things before silence becomes easier." He faced her. "For 4 years, I told myself Margaret and our boy were the only life I was going to get, that losing them meant I had used up whatever portion of happiness a man gets." Eleanor remained still. "I know that isn't sensible," he said. "Grief seldom cares what's sensible. No. When I found you, I thought I was giving a broken woman one safe night. Then you moved my ledgers out of the pantry. You saved money I didn't know I was losing. You brought order back into rooms I had stopped seeing. You argued with a land thief, a judge, half the town, and occasionally me." "Occasionally?" His mouth warmed. "Frequently." She smiled. Thomas's expression turned serious again. "Somewhere in it, I stopped waking up thinking first about what was gone. I started thinking about what was here." Eleanor's hands lay motionless in her lap. "You are the clearest-minded, most stubborn, most competent person I've met in 36 years, Thomas said. "And I don't want you merely to stay in Harland Creek. I want you here, in this house, with me, if you could want that too." The girl on the station platform seemed both very near and impossibly far away. "Yes," Eleanor said. Thomas closed his eyes once. When he opened them, 4 years of guardedness had not vanished, but a door had opened through it. He crossed the kitchen and took her hands. No kiss, no grand promise, just his calloused hands around hers, and the quiet certainty that neither was holding the other prisoner. For that moment, it was enough. Crane's investigation moved quickly because Eleanor's evidence had already done much of the organizing. Leonard Pratt broke on the second day. At first, he denied altering anything. Then Crane placed Gerald's loan copy beside Thomas's assessment, Core's original survey, Ellery's sworn statement, and bank records obtained under territorial authority. 7 deposits had entered Pratt's personal account. Each deposit came shortly before one of the 7 ranches changed hands. Pratt asked for a lawyer. Then, before the lawyer arrived, he said he had kept records Hayes ordered him to destroy. He had not known why he kept them. Eleanor did. Guilt sometimes preserved the evidence of itself. 11 days later, Crane's report charged Hayes with fraud, coercion, and conspiracy through altered public records. Pratt was charged as an accessory, and Foster Dobbs was named as a suspected co-conspirator. Hayes challenged the investigation and lost. Thomas's fraudulent tax debt was frozen and rendered unenforceable pending the larger case. Then Hayes disappeared. His house was locked one morning. His horses were gone. Briggs was gone. The territorial court issued a warrant. "He'll be found," Cross said. "He knows offices and leverage. He does not know how to disappear into mountains." When Thomas brought the news home, Eleanor was drinking coffee at the kitchen table. "Good," she said. "That's all? What would you prefer? A dance? I thought you might feel triumphant." Eleanor considered it. "I feel as if I can breathe correctly again." Thomas sat opposite her. "What do you need now?" She thought with the seriousness the question deserved. One morning of sleeping past 5, Pete admitting he eats the peppermints, and time for this to feel real. Thomas laid his hand over hers. "It's real." She turned her palm beneath his. "I know." Justice came in smaller forms after that. Daniel Corr received notice that 3 of the 7 disputed ranch transfers, including his own, had been identified for possible restoration proceedings. It promised nothing. It returned no cattle. It did not give him back the lost years. But the official letter used the word restoration. Corr read it at Thomas's kitchen table with shaking hands. Nobody made a speech. Pete simply refilled his coffee. Before leaving to meet the territorial attorney, Corr shook Eleanor's hand. "You told me to come." "I did. I'm glad I came. So am I." In November, Eleanor rented a small room above the dry goods store. On the door she placed a sign. Eleanor Whitmore, Property and Accounts. Her first client was Ada Ferris, a widow whose husband had died leaving 3 years of bad books and a loan she did not understand. Eleanor spent 2 hours showing her exactly what she owned, owed, and could choose. At the door, Ada asked the fee. "Nothing today. Come back when you need me again. We'll keep a proper account. People say you caused a great deal of trouble." "I solved trouble," Eleanor said. "The distinction matters." Ada thought about that. Yes, it does. Within 2 months, Eleanor had 12 regular clients, including ranchers who entered her office embarrassed to seek financial help from a woman and left too relieved to maintain the embarrassment. Margaret Sully began sending coffee upstairs. Constance Alderman, who had once publicly questioned the propriety of Eleanor's life at the Carter Ranch, passed the office one afternoon and gave her a stiff little nod. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement that a former opinion might require revision. Eleanor returned it with equal diplomacy. Pete heard about the exchange and said, "Whole Valley knows your name now. Half are glad. Other half's catching up." Then he took a peppermint from the kitchen table. Eleanor said nothing. Gerald and Clara gave formal depositions. Gerald finally tried to apologize without asking Eleanor to absolve him. "I owe you more than testimony. You owe Clara the work of becoming a better husband," Eleanor said. "As for me, you wrote a letter that brought me here. I'll count everything after that as part of the account. That's generous." "No, accurate." He almost laughed. By December, the Carter Ranch had changed. The south pasture rotation was working. Feed costs had fallen beyond Eleanor's estimate. The ledgers were current and lived in the study where no flour tin could hide them. The cupboard door hung straight. The back door draft was sealed. The lamp burned clean. More importantly, the house no longer felt like a place preserved after death. Thomas spoke of spring plans. Sometimes he spoke of Margaret. Eleanor never competed with a dead woman and never asked him to erase grief to prove love. When Margaret's name came, Eleanor let it remain in the room. Thomas gradually learned that remembering one life did not betray another. He talked more. She listened more. They worked. They ate together. They developed the small habits from which a home is actually made, knowing who wanted the coffee stronger, whose boots needed drying nearest the stove, when the other was too tired to keep reading figures, when silence meant peace, and when it meant pain. On a Sunday in mid-December, they rode to the north pasture to check fence. Snow lay white along the mountains, though the valley remained clear beneath a hard blue sky. The creek moved black between ice-fringed banks, the water that William Hayes had wanted badly enough to break men for it. Thomas stopped his horse above the creek. Eleanor drew alongside. "I need to ask you something properly." Her chest tightened. I said something in the kitchen before. I meant it, but I said it wrong. I told you I wanted you here, without telling you exactly what I was offering. He removed one glove. Eleanor Whitmore, will you marry me? She looked at him. He went on before she could answer. Not because I need someone to run the ranch, though I'd be a fool to pretend you haven't saved it from me more than once. Not because I was lonely, though I was. I'm asking because, when I think about the years ahead, I want them with you in them. I want to be worthy of the way you look at me. Wind moved across the pasture and lifted a loose strand of Eleanor's hair. She remembered another cold evening. A platform, a suitcase, a letter torn in two. The certainty that no one was coming. Then a quiet man standing 8 feet away with his hat in his hands. Don't sit alone tonight, miss. She had spent most of her life wondering whether someone would ever choose her. The months since St. Louis had taught her that she had been asking the wrong question. Other people's choices had never measured her accurately. The question was what she would choose to build. She had built a case strong enough to expose a system that had robbed 7 families. She had helped Clara step out from her uncle's control, and Gerald step toward accountability. She had given Daniel Corr a chance, however uncertain, to reclaim what had been stolen. She had opened an office where frightened people walked in, carrying papers they did not understand, and left knowing what choices remained to them. She had become Pete's friend, though neither would ever say it plainly, while peppermints could do the work. And with Thomas, she had built something neither pity nor loneliness could have made. Trust first, then work, then companionship, then the courage to imagine more. Yes, Eleanor said, I will marry you, Thomas Carter. He reached across the space between their horses. She put her hand in his. For a while, they remained above the creek, the ranch behind them and white mountains beyond. Winter was still coming. The Hayes hearing waited in February. Corr still faced a legal fight. Fences would break, cattle would sicken, and grief would return on certain nights. But hardship was no longer the same thing as emptiness. Thomas squeezed her hand. Pete will say he knew. Pete will say he knew before we did. He'll be unbearable. He's earned a little of it. They turned toward home. At the ranch gate, Pete looked up from his tools. His eyes moved from Thomas's face to Eleanor's, then to the distance between their horses. Took you long enough, he said. Thomas stared at him. You knew? First day. First day. She fixed the lamp chimney. Pete picked up his hammer and walked toward the south fence, as if that explanation were exhaustive. Eleanor laughed. The sound surprised her with its ease. That evening, the kitchen lamp burned over the table, where fear had been divided into useful tasks, and strangers had become family. Thomas brought in wood. Pete stole another peppermint. Eleanor put the ledger on its proper shelf. Outside, Montana winter gathered over the mountains. Inside, nobody sat alone. Eleanor had not found the life promised in Gerald Hatch's letter. She had found something harder earned and far more durable. Not a rescue. Not a prize for having endured humiliation. A beginning she had helped make with her own hands. The night she arrived in Harland Creek, she had believed the world's failure to choose her was the measure of her worth. She knew better now. Worth had never been waiting at the end of a railway line in another person's decision. It had been in her all along, in the mind that saw patterns, the courage that worked while afraid, the dignity that refused borrowed shame, and the stubbornness to build where something had been broken. On the platform, Thomas Carter had offered one safe night. Eleanor Whitmore stood up and took it. Everything after that, they built together.